Not many games let you take the role of the villains, the ones trying to stop the heroes from saving the day. But that's the main premise of the action roguelike Skul the Hero Slayer, which centers on the titular character going to save the Demon King after his majesty gets kidnapped by humans. As he does so, he begins to find traces of a dark conspiracy that not only calls the nobility of the heroic humans into question, but is also linked with the circumstances of his death. The story of the game initially left off on a cliffhanger that didn't quite reveal everything going on with the conspiracy, but over the years, additional content updates to the game have been released that answer the leftover questions, which lead to a dramatic final encounter with the mastermind behind it all. However, to see all that lore and story is easier said than done, as it involves completing the initial game, all of the levels of a game mode that escalates in difficulty with each completion, and a third special encounter that's only unlocked after completing the previously mentioned game modes. There's also dialogue from the various characters that needs to be seen in order to fill in some blanks. To make it easier to see it all, let's go through the information in the game and put it all together so we can see the full story of Skul the Hero Slayer. Obviously, there's spoilers for the game ahead, so if you don't want to be spoiled, then get out of here, bro. Why are you watching this? Feel free to come back whenever you're ready to watch this, though, and the video will be here. Also, if you haven't already, you should take the time to play the game, as the way the story is told in it is the way it's meant to be experienced, and it's going to be better than just listening to me narrate over it all anyways. Alright, with that out of the way, let's get started. The story starts with a continent named Harmonia, which had two societies living upon it. The first was a human society, which was based in a city named Carleon. Carleon was ruled over by an emperor, a man named Alexander, who lived in extravagance, exemplified by the sprawling ornate palace that was his home. His citizens, however, didn't share in the splendor, living more modest lives, working the variety of jobs that were common in medieval societies, or destitute ones, wallowing in the slums of the land where starvation was common. The people didn't really notice the inequalities in their society, though, as they were blinded by their faith in the prominent religion of Carleon, which was named the Order of Leonia. Revering a goddess appropriately named Leonia, this religion was ubiquitous in Carleon society, with nearly every citizen, from the lowliest peasant to the emperor in his palace, practicing it. Sitting atop this religious order was an archbishop named Saint Joan II, who, from atop a cathedral that rivaled Alexander's palace in size, guided the people of Carleon in the ways of Leonia. The other society of Harmonia was a lot different from Carleon. The first and biggest difference was that it wasn't a human society, but one made up of demons. A bunch of different kinds of demons lived in the society. There were ogres, foxes, dwarves, goblins, and many others. Skeletons were also a prominent figure in it, and they were said to be born when a strong-willed person died before achieving their life goals. All of these beings were ruled over by the Demon King, who lived in a towering, extravagant castle that gave his majesty a bird's-eye view over his domain. Living alongside him in his castle were his senators, who were vassals of his that helped him run his vast kingdom. The other difference between the humans and the demons was that the demons didn't practice the religion of the Order of Leonia. In fact, it didn't seem they revered Leonia at all. The only evidence of religion amongst the demons came from the evil druids of Druid Canyon, who revered 7 entities they only called them, each of whom was associated with a character flaw which were known as the 7 deadly sins in Carleon. Due to the differences between their respective societies, there was animosity between the humans of Carleon and the demons of the Demon King. It wasn't uncommon for demons to kill humans, either for sport or sustenance, which caused retaliatory attacks from humans in response. Of course, these killings escalated tensions between the two, which caused wars to break out between them. To protect itself and its citizens, Carleon had a large, standing army which was made up of various types of foot soldiers. There was a particularly fearsome battalion of knights named the Golden Mane Knights that guarded the royal palace from demonic incursions, the leader of whom was a rotund, mustachioed man who was not only said to be the strongest man in the land, but also the handsomest. Carleon didn't only use traditional soldiers to protect its citizens, though. It used mages, too, developing a large magic program to cultivate the magical arts and use them for its defense. The Demon Society likewise had an army of its own, which was made up of all kinds of demons from its domain. Some were more cooperative, like the werewolves and gargoyles, while others were less so, such as the foxes, whose difficult nature may have emerged due to the discrimination and extermination their race faced in the past. Just like Carleon, the demons had a magic of their own to use in the fighting, but theirs was a little different. While demons had an innate magic about them which gave them certain abilities, they also used a material known as quintessence to cast spells and use abilities. These powers could only be unlocked after a uniquely trained artisan worked with special diorites mined from a particular mountain in the demon region to create the object, which was said to contain the soul of a person from the past, be they human or demon. Perhaps due to the creation process, each quintessence only had one spell it could be used for, but it was typically very powerful, as well as versatile, as any soldier could use the object, not just mages, to cast the spell in it. However, quintessences didn't come without drawbacks, as if the user was weak, they could find themselves being used by the object instead of the other way around. And once their power was drained, the quintessence would abandon them. With these armies, the two societies of Harmonia waged war on each other, but as the conflict wore on through the years, neither side was ever able to completely defeat the other. This left Harmonia in a permanent state of tension and war that contradicted the apparent pleasantness of its name. Living in this uneasy world in a small village somewhere in Carleon was a young orphaned boy. This boy was unique because his small frame actually hid an incredible strength that was freakish and extraordinary. However, it was reminiscent of the power of the demons, and as a result, the villagers were scared of him. When demons attacked the village one day, the boy used his strength to defend the helpless villagers, knowing it was the right thing to do and hoping it would finally get them to accept him. But his intervention had the opposite effect, as after saving his peers, their fear of him only deepened. Treating him worse than the literal monsters that were coming to eat them, the villagers ostracized the boy, and he soon gave up on winning their hearts. Recognizing he would never have a home there, the boy left the village to wander Harmonia. Despite the hostility he was met with by humans in his youth, the boy didn't give up on his desire of being accepted, so during his travels, killed any demon he came across. He continued doing this for an unknown time until one day, a demon threw herself between him and his next victim. She chastised the boy for his violent actions, saying they would never bring about peace, that all life was important, and that if he took the time to try and understand demons, he would walk the path towards peace. The gesture stayed the boy's blade, who was curious about this demon who talked to him instead of attacking him. He talked with her and was consoled by her, finding her to be more human than the villagers he had grown up with. As the two spent time together, they became friends, something the boy had never had. Given her success with the boy, the demon girl further believed that tensions between demons and humans could be overcome by talking things out. But at her next attempt to do so, she was fatally injured by the humans she dared to approach. As his friend lay dying, the demon girl begged the boy to not give in to his anger, urging him to try to get humans and demons to understand each other so that true peace could come to Harmonia. After burying his one and only friend, the boy, entranced by the words of the demon girl, set off across Harmonia to see if peace could come to the land. Years passed, and as the boy grew into a young man, he constantly tried to practice the methods of his fallen friend, attempting to talk to demons he came across. But none of them would ever listen, requiring the man to kill those he tried talking to in self-defense. Not every interaction ended this way, though. There was one time, when he was wandering near Mount Paran, that he heard or saw a demon disturb a dragon's nest, which caused the winged creature to attack the demon. The man immediately jumped into action, killing the dragon to save the demon's life. He asked the demon if he was okay, but before he received his answer, the man left, perhaps not wanting to have to kill the demon he just saved when he saw who his rescuer was. Nonetheless, an interaction of this sort with the demon was a rare one, making the man feel that the peace he and his friend sought was still far off, if not outright impossible. One day, a pair of soldiers from the Carleon Empire summoned him to the great city, as the Emperor, having heard of him surviving countless demon attacks, wished to speak with him. When the two met, the Emperor laid out his request. He asked the man to become a hero of Carleon, someone who would be a symbol of peace for the Empire by slaying as many demons as possible. Since the man was still trying to find peace through his friend's means, he didn't agree to the Emperor's proposal, but did agree to go on a special mission for him. The mission put the man outside of his comfort zone, as he had to work with a group of novice adventurers, and cooperation really wasn't his strong suit. However, it didn't take long before the man warmed up to his companions and became comrades with them. When the group was nearing their destination, they came across a demon starving on the ground. While his companions wanted the demon dead, the man, remembering the words of the demon girl, decided to show some kindness to him by giving him food and allowing him to leave with his life. While internally proud of his actions, his kindness would turn out to have deadly results. That night, after the group set up camp, the man stole away to complete his personal mission, and when he returned, he found all of his comrades were dead, and looming over their corpses was the demon that he spared earlier that day. The man asked him why he had done this, but was met with silence, so raised his sword to fight the demon. However, his foe was too powerful. He was unable to defeat the demon, and he fled from his wrath. As the man began the long, lonely march back to the Emperor, the guilt of the deaths of his companions, deaths that he caused to happen, weighed heavy on his heart. A feeling that was compounded by the constant failures he'd faced in trying to speak with demons and get them to understand him and humans in general. By the time he met with the Emperor and gave him a report of what had happened, he had an answer for Alexander's proposal. With tears streaming down his face, the man accepted his role and became the hero of Carleon. Over the next 10 years, the hero fought in countless battles and became the symbol for Carleon that the Emperor had wanted. While he did what he thought was best for protecting the innocent, the hero soon found that the blood of other humans, not demons, was on his hands, and the peace he sought was nowhere to be found. It made him question his actions, and he realized that this heroic path was not one he wanted to walk. He came to the Emperor and asked to be released from his service. The Emperor granted his request on the condition that he train the next generation of heroes to replace him. The hero did as he was asked, and soon handpicked the warrior that would inherit his cause. But 10 days after the second hero left on their first mission, their severed hand came back to the Empire. The rest of their body was never found. The Emperor calmly explained that the hero of Carleon should not know defeat, so ordered that the next hero up should be trained. However, he too met the same fate, as did all of the rest of the heroes that were selected after him. Watching all of these young people give their lives filled the first hero with guilt, compelling him to give up his retirement. While the hero believed it to be his choice to return to the Emperor's service, the gleaming, unemotional stare of Alexander implied this was an outcome that he intended to happen all along. He may have even masterminded it. In any case, the first hero returned to service and performed his duty beautifully. However, despite his role as the hero of Carleon, the vanquisher of demons, the hero apparently still had a soft spot for demons, as one day he caught a demon polymorphed as a human in the market of Carleon. But instead of turning the demon over to the bishops of St. Leonia, or killing her himself, the hero let the demon go, sparing her life. It was a gesture the demon never forgot. The hero himself was also once a recipient of kindness from a demon, as at some point while on a mission, the hero was on the verge of starving to death. An orc chef came upon his malnourished form and, feeling pity for the hero, cooked him a meal that saved his life. Once the orc left to get some water, the hero left, but not before leaving an impression on the demon he left behind. While these interactions may have given him hope that cooperation between humans and demons could one day come to Harmonia, that dream was shattered when word came to the Carleon Empire that the Demon King had returned. War between the humans and the demons began anew, and after several years of countless battles, everything came down to a final fight, which was set to take place on the plain that used to be the forest of Harmonia. It wasn't long before the fighting commenced, and though the demons were powerful, the humans rallied behind their icon, the hero of Carleon, who was sure to lead them to victory. As that victory appeared to be upon them, the tide of the battle turned when the Demon King himself took to the field. As the hero looked upon his foe, he realized he recognized him. It was the same demon that killed his companions all those years ago, before he became the hero of Carleon. Although the Demon King had escaped him before, the first hero wasn't the warrior then that he was now. And after unleashing the true extent of his power, the hero killed the Demon King, avenging his fallen companions and resulting in a complete victory for humankind. With the death of the Demon King, the peace for Harmonia that the hero had been fighting for was finally upon the land. But despite that supposed truth, the hero felt the opposite, as the Carleon army began a bloody campaign across the continent, attempting to exterminate the demons that were left, an order handed to them by the Emperor, who wanted to see them rendered extinct. As he watched the soldiers rage across the land, killing at will, becoming so monstrous that they appeared to be demons themselves, the hero couldn't help but feel like he was even further from his goal of true peace, and wondered how long this peace would last. With the defeat of the demons, Carleon, protected by its legendary hero, became stronger than ever, and it experienced an era of peace. However, the hero didn't get to enjoy this peace, as he was still being sent on missions by the Emperor to eliminate the enemies of Carleon. Despite feeling that things were wrong with those in the upper ranks of his society, the hero shoved his feelings down and continued to fight, hoping his battles would bring about the peace he wanted. After decades of service, the first hero knew his time in the world was coming to an end. He pushed harder, hoping to bring in true peace to Harmonia, but questioned whether the path of force that he had been walking was the right one. His anxiety over the future may have been heightened by something more than his impending death. His son, who had been born at some point in the prior years, maybe even before the defeat of the Demon King. His son was a symbol of the next generation of people that would inherit Harmonia from him, and the hero felt Carleon needed to have peace so that people like his son didn't suffer the way he did when he was young. Then, the hero was visited by a boy, a demon boy, who claimed he was the new Demon King. Unlike the previous king, the boy didn't try to attack him. He tried to talk to him, just like the demon girl from all those years ago. Despite his initial reservations, the Demon King won the hero over with his insistence, which made the first hero think of his friend. Having been won over, the hero approached the Emperor with the Demon King's proposal. The two societies should sign a peace treaty so peace between their nations and the rest of Harmonia could be established. In a departure from his previous stance, the Emperor enthusiastically agreed to the idea, and the treaty was quickly signed, signifying the start of a new age for the continent, one of understanding and kindness, one that the first hero had hoped to see ever since he was a young boy. However, despite the apparent peace that was about to come in, it was only a ruse by the Emperor as he pursued his true goal: total domination of the continent. And a discovery made by one of his citizens was going to help him achieve that goal. In the Carleon Empire, there was a brilliant, once-in-a-generation mage that accomplished things no one else did. One of the things she discovered and researched was a unique material known as dark quartz. The mage found that when someone used dark quartz, their power was greatly enhanced. However, it didn't come without a cost, as the dark quartz ate away at their body and mind, eventually corrupting them and driving them, as well as those around them, insane. Even more unsettling was the way dark quartz was created. It was not a stone that could be found in the natural world. It was artificial, only being created when a living creature was inflicted with intense pain. Due to the evil behind its creation and its corrupting nature, the mage stopped further research into dark quartz and destroyed all of her work investigating it before leaving Carleon forever. Despite her hope that her actions would mean dark quartz would never be uncovered again, at some point, the Emperor of Carleon found the remnants of her work. He realized that the power boost given by dark quartz could give him and his soldiers the edge they needed to finally overcome the demons of Harmonia, allowing them to wipe them out and unify the continent. In order to make this dream a reality, Carleon needed more dark quartz, so the Emperor had a large laboratory built underneath Carleon where the research and manufacture of dark quartz could resume once again. The Emperor wasn't going to subject humans to the torture needed in order to gather the material, though. Instead, he had his soldiers kidnap demons from all over Harmonia and bring them to the Dark Lab, where its alchemists inflicted them with the pain necessary to create the evil substance. Due to the amount of dark quartz that was needed, as well as how little of it was created from each living creature, it wasn't just a few handful of demons that were kidnapped. It was hundreds, if not more. These kidnappings and torturings of demons, of course, violated the peace treaty, but the secret of the lab was never uncovered by the Demon King. The first hero, the other proponent of the peace treaty, apparently knew of the lab's existence, but whether he knew of the lab at this period of time and condoned the experiments, or was overruled in allowing them, or learned about it later is unknown. In any case, the experiments continued until eventually, so much dark quartz had been gathered that nearly every soldier in the Carleon army was given some of the stones, and the alchemists in the Dark Lab began concocting a secret plan that would pave the path to Carleon's victory. Then, an encounter in Carleon occurred that set the wheels of the Emperor's plan into motion. One day, not long after the peace treaty had been signed, various higher-ups in Carleon were holding a banquet. Infiltrating the banquet was a witch in the guise of a cat. This witch was a retainer of the Demon King and was actually the genius mage who made the initial discovery of dark quartz. After fleeing from Carleon, she lived on her own for decades until meeting the current Demon King, where, impressed with his pacifism, she joined his cause, becoming the only human to live in Demon King Castle. As she spent time with His Majesty, she came to find that he had a friendship with the son of the first hero, who idolized his father and hoped to one day be a hero like he was. Although she no longer had any interest in befriending humans, a decision made after years of torment she faced from their hands, she thought the relationship between the king and the boy was curious. The Demon King then explained to her that the boy had a power that was one day going to bring peace to Harmonia. This made the witch take an interest in the boy, so when she caught a glimpse of him at the banquet, looking angry about the words of the hosts, words that were jeers and complaints about his father and idol, she decided to follow him. When the main host, the commander of the Golden Mane Knights, excused himself from the party and headed deeper into the building, the boy followed after him, accompanied by the witch. They watched him open up a secret elevator and secretly tailed him all the way through the dark labs in the depths of Carleon, sickened at the horrifying experiments being done on demons. They reached the deepest chamber where the commander was discussing Carleon's plan with the director of the lab, which was to usher in the second coming of Leonia by using dark quartz to create a new body for her, which took the form of a distorted chimera. The boy listened eagerly to their plan, but didn't notice that he was leaning on the door too much, leading to it opening up, exposing him to the conspirators. After a moment, soldiers were sent after him and the witch, so the two ran for their lives. They fell through a pit in the floor that they didn't notice, which left the boy injured. Although he kept trying to flee, his pursuers eventually caught up to him, and once they did, they ensured that the boy would never be able to tell the secret of the lab to anyone. The witch did not intervene, believing she would do more harm than good if she did so, but agonized over her reluctance to act. She looked over to the boy's attacker and noticed he was floating in midair. He had been captured by the Demon King, who had come to Carleon after receiving a report that the witch was in danger from a messenger in Demon King Castle. The soldier tried to retaliate against the king by using dark quartz to unleash a devastating attack upon him, but he exploded before the attack made impact, a fatal side effect of using too much of the evil material. The Demon King then looked over the boy, noting that he would live if the witch could heal him. She started to do so, but couldn't concentrate due to the chaos of the moment. And then, the first hero showed up. He took his son in his arms, then, in wrath and despair, launched his fury upon those that he felt were responsible for what happened to him, the demons that were standing over his dying body. The Demon King and the witch were able to escape his wrath, but the witch was knocked unconscious in the attack. During the escape, the Demon King noticed that one of the bishops was looking at him strangely, which made him feel like something was wrong. When he returned to his domain, he tried to find the soldier that gave him the report of the witch and Carleon, wondering how they managed to get the information, but he could find no trace of them. It felt like a setup. By whom, he wasn't sure. Given the implications that the Emperor had a hand in the fate of the successor heroes of Carleon, it seemed likely that he had a hand in it. But the Demon King never found anything linking him to the scheme. He spent a week mulling over the possibilities, and then finally got some good news. The witch was awake. This was followed by bad news. Using the death of the first hero's son as justification, the Carleon Empire declared war on the demons. The demons scrambled to assemble their forces, deploying units to the forest of Harmonia that separated their domain from the humans. The senators debated on which actions to take, and everyone looked to the Demon King for guidance. But he was distracted, lost in thought about the events of the night of the banquet. Then, from over the horizon, a small skeleton appeared. From its shambling movements, they could all tell it had recently risen, and as it approached, they could tell who it was. The son of the first hero. As a result of becoming a skeleton, his memory was erased, but desiring to be a hero like his father, he had marched towards Demon King Castle intent on conquering it, and made it there by the power of his will. The Demon King went to the skeleton, wrapped him in his cape, and gave him a new name, Skul. Skul was then sent to the skeleton commander to be trained as a soldier. He turned out to be a dependable little skeleton and even earned the nickname Little Bones, but he had only a few days of training before Carleon launched their attack. The demons were completely unprepared to fight against these new Carleon soldiers strengthened by dark quartz. The Carleon army even managed to infect the Ents of the Forest of Harmonia with the material, making them feral and turning them against the demons. It was a one-sided fight, and many demons were killed or captured, including the senators of the Demon King. The first hero himself launched an attack on the top floor of Demon King Castle. Those gathered at the top could do nothing as he swept through their forces and captured the Demon King, carrying his majesty off to Carleon to pay for his crimes. In the midst of this fighting, Skul had been knocked unconscious, but was awakened by one of his comrades who pushed him to continue fighting the humans. Along the way, Skul found and rescued the witch, who told him about the capture of the Demon King. Remembering what the Demon King said about Skul when he was a boy, about the power that would save the demons and the rest of Harmonia, the witch realized he had the power to rescue the Demon King, so asked him to do so. As the two made their way to the contingent of humans that had the Demon King, they came across the skeleton guard captain, who told them an incredibly powerful ogre wiped out his unit, an ogre that had dark quartz embedded in his body. He donated his head to Skul, who used his ability to take on the powers of another entity by placing their head on his shoulders. Skul and the witch then continued on, finding the ogre and defeating him in battle, which released him from the hold that dark quartz had over his body. The three began to head to Demon King Castle, but then the first hero arrived, killing the ogre. Although he was before his son reborn in the body of a skeleton, the first hero didn't recognize him, perhaps blinded by his newfound hate for all of demonkind. He powered up and launched a devastating attack that knocked Skul out. When Skul came to, he found he was on the top floor of Demon King Castle, having been saved by the witch. She explained the situation they found themselves in, then explained that most of her magic was tied up in helping the demons recover from the initial attack, meaning it would be up to him to save the Demon King. She could still provide some help though, giving Skul a magic scroll that helped him carry more items and weapons. She also told him about dark quartz and its effect on people. Then, thanks to her previous research on the material, said that she could purify any dark quartz he brought to her, allowing him to safely use it to make himself stronger. She warned that if Carleon got to continually use dark quartz in this manner, it would endanger the entire continent, so tasked Skul with another mission, to collect as much dark quartz from the Carleon army as possible, so they could no longer use it for nefarious purposes. With that, Skul set out to complete his quest. It was one that was easier said than done though, as the soldiers of the Carleon army were fearsome, and Skul could be overwhelmed by their power. If that happened, he would wake up in the Demon King Castle, where he could use the dark quartz he gathered in his previous journey to ensure that he could go further in his next one. With the help of the witch, dark quartz, and lots of other demons, Skul freed the Ents and their patriarch Yggdrasil of the Forest of Harmonia from the hold of dark quartz, defeated the Lyanna sisters in a 2-on-1 fight in the Carleon Palace, watched the Dark Lab director get smashed under the foot of the Chimera of the Black Lab, defeated the Distorted Goddess in her twisted lair, and brought down St. Joan II in the Cathedral of Leonia. There was only one obstacle left: the first hero, who personally guarded the captured Demon King at the pinnacle of the most sacred tower in Carleon. The first hero attacked Skul, ironically determined to kill the little skeleton that used to be his son as revenge for his son's death. Surprisingly, he was defeated by Skul, so the first hero unleashed his golden form, which had not seen the light of day since he killed the previous Demon King. No one had ever defeated him in this form, but there's a first time for everything, and perhaps fittingly, Skul handed his father his first defeat. The force of their battle shattered the vat that held the Demon King, but still determined to prevent his rescue, the first hero slammed to the ground, bringing all three of them to a chamber within the tower. Despite being on his last legs, motivated by his hate, his anger at his betrayal, and his duty, the first hero started one last fight with Skul, but despite his desperation, was once again defeated by his son. Slumped against a wall, the first hero took a moment to grieve his failure to the people of Carleon, then accepted his defeat. Before the end, his most precious treasure floated to his hands, a picture of his son. He muttered to the picture that he wished he spent more time with him, and that he missed them, inadvertently admitting his feelings to his son who stood close by. At that moment, the witch showed up and grabbed the Demon King, saying they had to go because the tower was collapsing. After hesitating for a moment to look over his father, Skul jumped out of the tower, leaving the first hero to be buried in the rubble of the building. Back at Demon King Castle, Skul sat with the Demon King on a balcony as His Majesty told him the story of his father and their shared goal of peace, one that was sabotaged by hateful people in Carleon who never wanted to see it come to life, and were the true enemy of everyone in Harmonia. Indeed, although the Demon King had now been rescued and the evil experiments of Carleon had been stopped, the battle was not over yet. The one that was behind the plot still needed to be uncovered and stopped before they used dark quartz to destroy the demons and plunge the continent into chaos. But for the time being, they all took a moment to enjoy the brief peace brought upon the land by Skul. Sometime later, a dwarf that was helping the witch with her dark quartz research sent Skul to meet the witch in the Forest of Harmonia. Skul found her by a large block of dark crystals that pulsed with the energy of dark quartz. As the two were getting ready to start a careful investigation, a bunch of kids showed up and distracted the witch. With her distracted, Skul approached the crystals, which reformed into a polished black mirror that, after he touched it, sucked him into it. Skul then found himself in familiar surroundings. It was the Forest of Harmonia the day of Carleon's invasion, but things were different. There were no surviving skeletons or demons, except for the witch, who was face to face with the first hero. However, unlike what happened before, this time, when the first hero powered up, he surged with the energy of dark quartz. Before he could unleash his wrath on the witch, Skul jumped in and rescued her from his clutches. He dragged the unconscious witch back to Demon King Castle to find it completely ruined, and heard the witch mutter that the Demon King had been murdered. Two things that had never happened. It was almost as if that dark mirror brought him to another time where the events of that day were different. The mirror was present in the ruins of the castle, and after touching it again, Skul was again sucked into it, then found himself back in the Demon King Castle he'd always known. He was immediately questioned by the witch and her dwarf assistant, who, after hearing Skul's report of another world being in it, decided they would further investigate the mirror. In the meantime, they allowed Skul to go back into it to gather more information. When he did so, he did find that a replica of Harmonia was inside the mirror, and he repeated his journey through the land like he had done back in his world. But it wasn't exactly the same. It was much more dangerous, with many new powerful enemies that didn't exist in Skul's world being present. And some of the enemies were supercharged with a dark quartz power like nothing Skul had ever seen, including the bosses, who gained new, terrible abilities that made them much more difficult to overcome. Strangely, the dwarf assistant found that after putting a strange piece of dark quartz in a machine hooked up to the mirror, the challenge of these foes could be increased, making Skul's next run through the mirrored Harmonia more dangerous and difficult. Early on in this journey, Skul was pulled into a gap where he met a ghost, and over the course of his runs through the mirror, he learned more about the mirrored world and its purpose from the spectral entity. The dark mirror was apparently a piece of quartz technology that was created and powered by dark quartz. The ghost confirmed that the version of Harmonia within it was a replicated one, created by someone who used dark quartz to change the course of history, specifically erasing Skul's existence from it. Without Skul's existence, the Carleon army was able to overwhelm the demons of Harmonia and claim victory in the war. The reason for this change of events was multifaceted. Firstly, back in the real world, there was a bottleneck on dark quartz production, as only a small amount could be produced from one living creature at a time, and there were only so many demons that could be kidnapped and experimented on. But by creating an entire world where the Carleon Empire reigned supreme, this constraint was removed, dramatically increasing dark quartz yields. Second, these yields could be increased even further if Skul were to repeat his journey through this mirrored Harmonia, forcing the humans of Carleon to suffer pain and torment, which was why the Black Mirror was conveniently placed in an area that the demons could find it, so Skul could be tricked into creating more dark quartz. The last reason came from experiments that found that if dark quartz was injected into a creature, the unique special abilities of that creature could be extracted from it and placed into a dark quartz, creating dark abilities, which were what the supercharged enemy in the mirror were using. However, in their raw form, dark abilities were unsafe for normal soldiers to use, as they warped the user until causing them to explode, perhaps explaining what happened to the soldier that attacked the Demon King the night Skul's human life ended. To prevent this from happening, a dark quartz heart, which, like everything else, was crafted in the black labs of Carleon, needed to be used to stabilize the dark ability and prevent its adverse effects. The culmination of this work could be seen in the mirror world version of the first hero, who surged with dark powers that the original first hero would never allow himself to use. There was another experiment Carleon attempted to do with dark quartz, but this one did not have the same results as the one with the first hero. While Skul was erased from the history of the mirrored Harmonia, he wasn't wiped out of existence completely. Instead, recognizing how powerful he was, Carleon abducted the small skeleton and injected him with dark quartz to enhance his power and force him to fight for Carleon. During the process, they discovered a new type of dark quartz called enriched dark quartz that was more powerful than the normal material, but was more unstable, exploding if it came too close to a dark quartz device. That posed a problem, as after the experiments in Dark Skull were complete, he was made to rest in a dark quartz tank that would only open after 6 pieces of enriched dark quartz were placed in it. A researcher eventually managed to change the enriched dark quartz enough to allow it to be placed within the tank and release Dark Skull. But Carleon's hopes that he would fight for them were dashed when Dark Skull went on a rampage, killing nearly all of the researchers and destroying their lab. One researcher was able to pull the dark quartz from the dark quartz tank, which apparently weakened Dark Skull and forced him back into the tank. The researcher then threw the enriched dark quartz into the dark mirror to prevent the monster that was Dark Skull from being released again. While their experiment with Dark Skull was a failure, the rest went off without a hitch, and with all the dark quartz and dark abilities harvested from the numerous worlds of the Black Mirrors, the Emperor's dream of unifying Harmonia and eradicating the demons seemed to be destined to come true. However, there was an unintended side effect of the Emperor's scheming. The spirits of those he tortured and killed in order to produce his dark items wandered the worlds of the Dark Mirror until they eventually found a gap between them. Here, they were able to manifest into a physical form thanks to the dark quartz of the mirror, and they were angry. One day, when the mirror became a dumping ground for dark abilities, the ghost decided to gather them to use them against the Emperor for revenge. But there was one problem. The ghost was trapped in the mirror, so they couldn't get at the Emperor. They were forced to bide their time and wait for an opportunity to present itself. And Skul was that opportunity. With his unique makeup, being killed from contaminated dark quartz, and strengthened by purified dark quartz, he could wield the power necessary to defeat the Emperor of Carleon once and for all. Eventually, after Skul completed a run through the Black Mirror, instead of being ousted from the world, he was transported to another gap where he was greeted by the Ghost and the Witch, who had managed to come to the Mirror World during Skul's excursions, where she met the Ghost and agreed to help them. The two gave him a choice. He could go back to Demon King Castle and delay the plans of the Emperor of Carleon by running through the mirror again, or, if he thought he was ready, he could finally face him and put an end to his plans. When Skul was ready, he chose to face the Emperor. He was sent back to the real world to find that Demon King Castle was in the midst of being invaded by the Carleon army, finding many of his demonic allies fighting off the soldiers. He made his way through the fighting and, thanks to the help of the witch, through a dark barrier at the top of Demon King Castle. As he made his way across the top floor of the castle, he passed by the Quartz Tech tank that held Dark Skull, and if he gathered the enriched dark quartz that were hidden in the dark mirror, could fight his evil reflection. After either undergoing the harrowing battle or running past the tank, Skul finally met Alexander, who stood before the captured Demon King. After a monologue where he went over his attempts at understanding Leonia and talking down to Skul, the Emperor started a fight with the skeleton, using the massive amount of dark quartz in his body to launch spells at his foe. But he was eventually defeated by Skul. Incredulous, the Emperor then showed the culmination of all the dark quartz he harvested from Skul's rampage through the dark mirror, fusing his human body with various bits of quartz tech to become the new god of Harmonia. However, just like the Chimera before him, the Emperor's god form was destroyed by Skul. At that moment, allies of Skul showed up. The witch, brought by Arachne, and the ghost and the dark witch from the dark mirror, apparently brought by the witch's magic. Just in time too, as the Emperor, being frustrated at losing and seeing his enemies gather before him, shot out a bomb that was sure to destroy them and most of the demons. But with the help of his allies, Skul was able to destroy the bomb before it detonated. The ghost and the dark witch disappeared after the bomb's destruction, and the witch was left exhausted by the ordeal. The Emperor, now without his mechanical upgrades, lied shriveled on the ground before Skul, begging for his life. But when Skul's back was turned, he zapped him with a power that stole all of Skul's upgrades from him. Despite all the setbacks he'd faced, he still wasn't done fighting, and had one last ace up his sleeve. The dark versions of the first hero, who, given Skul's experience in dealing with one of them in the Dark Mirror, were sure to turn the tide of the fighting. However, before they could launch their assault, there was still one last ally of Skul's waiting in the wings. And it was at this moment that the ally revealed themselves. It was none other than the first hero, Skul's father. After the building collapsed on him following his fight with Skul, the Emperor had his body dug out from the rubble, where it was found he was still alive. He was then brought to the labs beneath Carleon, where he was put in a container and hooked up to machines to either restore his vitality or inject him with dark quartz. When he regained consciousness, he found the door to his container gone. He then wandered the lab, finding that it wasn't only demons being experimented on, but humans too, including his old companions. It was then that the depths of the Emperor's greed and treachery were revealed to him, and he felt angry at being used as a tool by him. When he emerged from the dungeon, he saw Carleon's army ready to march on Demon King Castle. Fearing the worst, he rushed off to fight against the Emperor, and thankfully, arrived just in time. The hero took on the 3 dark clones of him at once, freeing up Skul to take on Alexander. Before the battle, the witch gave Skul the last blessing she could muster with her power, which was just what Skul needed, giving him the strength to overcome the Emperor for the last time. Defeated, Alexander fell in a heap before Skul and the first hero. The witch picked up the Demon King, once again saved by Skul, and shortly after, Carleon's soldiers arrived, ready to support the first hero and continue the Emperor's invasion. But the hero called them off, ready to put this era of war and violence to an end, and see an era of peace. Before he left, the witch began to tell him the truth of Skul's identity, but the little skeleton stopped her, perhaps feeling the time wasn't right. Perhaps recognizing what the witch was going to say, the first hero praised Skul's accomplishment of bringing peace to the land, like a father would to a son, then returned to Carleon. In the aftermath of the Emperor's demise, true peace came to the continent. A peace brought about by Skul, who became a hero of Harmonia, one that surpassed the hero of Carleon, living up to the prophecy the Demon King foretold of him, and the goal he had for himself when he was still alive. Once things had settled down for a bit, the first hero stole away to a scenic cliffside and penned a letter to his son. As he finished with a heart-touching wish to see his son again, a cough made him drop the letter. Skul then approached him, picked up the letter, and offered the hero a rag. As the two of them looked at each other, the story of Skul the Hero Slayer came to an end. While there are a few different themes in the story, how those with good intentions can be manipulated to perform evil deeds, how the next generation will eventually supplant and hopefully exceed prior ones, how important time with your family is, the biggest centers on how peace is brought about. While the first hero brought about a peace through killing Carleon's enemies, it was an uneasy one that he felt he needed to stay around for unless he wanted it to unravel, and one that he felt wasn't right. But once the new Demon King came to him and professed peace, true peace, the first hero finally saw a way that it was possible. If we took the time to understand each other in the real world, like the hero and Demon King did, having the courage to stand up to the ridicule, then maybe we could experience a bit of the peace of Harmonia. Now, I'm not perfect, so there may be some errors somewhere in the telling of the story, but this should tell the story of Skul the Hero Slayer in full. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask and I'll do my best to answer them. Likewise, if there's anything you feel was missed or wrong, or if you'd just like to share your thoughts about something in the story, feel free to leave a comment. I know I'd love to read it, and maybe it'll help somebody else too. Before I go, I'd like to remind you that every video on the channel is also uploaded to Spotify, so feel free to listen over there if that's easier for you. Okay, I think that's everything. So until next time, thank you for watching, and see you later.